How's it going, everybody? My name is Marcus Lashley, and I am the director of the UF Deer Lab. You may have heard of me before if you have followed the MSU Deer Lab, and that's because I was at Mississippi State for 4 years before moving to the University of Florida to start the Deer Lab here. And today I wanted to talk to you about the model that I've worked with Bronson Strickland and Steve Damaris, and now working in the UF Deer Lab. I've been working for a while on how we can develop extension programming that utilizes technology and delivers information really in the way that a lot of our consumers or our constituents are consuming information these days. So I wanted to start with a couple of things. One, so this is Bronson here in the picture, and you may recognize him. And next to him is Andy Ezel, who worked in forestry at Mississippi State. They are actually standing on a property that was donated to the university. It's about 500 acres, and it is set aside land for demonstration. And what you're looking at on the right side of this slide over here is actually what we're demonstrating on that site. So basically, there's several forest management strategies. Basically, everything you might want to do for a wildlife species and loblolly pine plantation is being demonstrated on this site, along with several other forest management practices. How you would maximize timber production, food plots, all sorts of things like that. So I really tried to pin Bronson down on this to see something, because I wanted to make a strong point to you. And I asked him, okay, this is a demonstration site. We've carried out several research studies on it. I've been involved in quite a few of those. The one that you're looking at here, that sampling grid, was actually a study that I set up with a couple of graduate students. And Bronson was collaborating on those, of course. But I wanted to know, out of all the extension programming that's going on this property, where we've actually had field days or other of the more traditional types of extension, how many people does he think reasonably have come and learned on that property? And he thought about that for a minute, but he came back and he said, I'm pretty confident that it's over 1,000 people between the forestry and wildlife programs, but it's probably less than 2,000. And that's been since 2013. And I don't know how many events have been out there, but there have been numerous events out there in for different reasons. And, we're still thinking, a couple of thousand people. So I want you to think about that when I'm going through several of these next slides. Before I really go into things, I'm going to show you a bunch of metrics about some different kinds of content. And I do not want you to think, I think it's a bad way to look at it, that we're basically trying to give ourselves a pat on the back or something. This is not a vanity thing at all. I'm hoping that showing you some of these things can help you to appreciate the value of technology and extension programming and some of the creative ways that we've been trying to get information into people's head. That is what this is all about, right? Another thing that I find pretty interesting about this situation is we have different people in the population, like this figure you're looking at. If you think about it like a pie, there are different segments of the population, and we can take the same information and change the way that we structure it and deliver it, and which platforms we use to do that to target different segments of the population. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. Another thing that I think is pretty important for you to think about when we're going through these different things is that this isn't a zero-sum game. All right. And what I mean by that is after doing this for a while and seeing how different labs operate and sharing information, and sometimes it seems like we're all thinking of it as a zero-sum game, like a pie. So in other words, if I took a piece of the pie, that means there's less pie for everybody else. Or in other words, if my lab got a lot of attention, that means your lab's going to get less attention, or your program and my program. That they're not actually competing. That's not how this works, especially with technology. And it really, all of this is about the resource, right? We all have the same mission. We are all trying to get good scientific-based information to people who can use that information. And many of the times, since a lot of us are working in natural resources, we might be in slightly different areas, but we're often targeting the same people with the information. And actually, when we're using technology, instead of it being zero sum, it's sort of this positive feedback loop where if you take a piece of my pie and share it, not only does your pie get bigger, my pie gets bigger. And then if everybody is sharing each other's pie, then everybody ends up with more pie. And I don't know about y'all, but I really like pie. No, I'm just kidding. If you think about it that way, why are we not all sharing everybody's content that's related to the audience that we're trying to reach? If we think about it that way, that doesn't make sense. And that really is one of the principles of how social media operates. It's about people creating content and sharing each other's content and sharing that information together. And that's why you see things really grow rapidly and go viral on some of these platforms. So we're really trying to take some of those principles and apply them to our extension program, because that ultimately is our goal, is to get information into as many people's head as possible. Another thing I want you to give you some context, about 90% of the world's data at the time that this was made, about 90% of that data was created within the previous 2 years. And that trend keeps on. Basically, we're on an exponential rate of increase in data. And that is largely because of the internet. And now a lot of that is being driven by social media. 2.5 quintillion, I didn't even know that was a number until I looked at this. But that should put things into perspective for you. The reach that you can have with this type of programming is basically unbounded, right? It's bounded by how many people there are on the planet, essentially. So that's a really good way to think about it. And this isn't, again, I want to reiterate this because I feel like often people are thinking about this like it's a competition, and it's not. We're all after the same mission. And if we all think of it that way, we can all help each other reach more people, which is the ultimate goal: reach more people to better impact the resource. So another thing that I think is pretty important, you may have seen a graph similar to this before, but it's basically talking about how people adopt information. And we have different kinds of people in the population. We have people that are innovators, and they tend to be driving new things to happen. And we have the opposite end of that spectrum, which are the laggards. And those are the people, like I have an uncle who literally has never turned on a computer still. Okay, so he's definitely a laggard. He is going to fight that until his grave. He will never turn on a computer because that's just not his thing, and that's not how he does things. And he's been able to make a good living doing that. So I guess it's working out for him. But I put this up for you because I wanted you to think about where we are. And to me, when I'm talking to Bronson about this, where we really have been aggressive in trying to use social media in particular to really get information out to a lot of people. I'm going to talk about podcasting some, trying to use those methods to get information out to a really large audience. We still feel like we're pretty close to the laggard line right there, between late majority and laggard in terms of extension programming. And I say that because we're trying to develop audiences on programs that have been around for long enough that now they're kind of, I don't want to say going obsolete, but they are not the new thing anymore. So for instance, Facebook, we put a lot of effort into developing audiences, especially Bronson with the MSU Deer Lab, into developing an audience on Facebook. But now there are 4 or 5 other platforms that are much more popular with younger generations. So, you know, we're already a decade behind on some of these things, and I don't want that to scare you or think, man, it's not worth doing it. I'm just trying to emphasize that from an extension programming standpoint, it is pretty important that we get aggressive with this so that we don't become obsolete. So let's talk about that property again. Bronson said that about 2,000 people had visited. We did a few studies on it. Here's one that I wanted to show you just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about with marketing. Now, the way that one of the studies, it was a food plot study, the way that we marketed that project to the scientific audience, you can see one of the papers from it is right here, was very different than the way we marketed it to a general population of people that we think can use that information. In this case, hunters are really interested in food plot programs, and we marketed it that way. We've done a couple of different things, but this video here was one of the first ones, and we actually just did that with an iPhone. It was a couple of minutes. If you can get somebody to watch me 53,000 times, that's pretty ridiculous. I mean, look at me. But really, it showed us the power of marketing. And you know, it really feels unusual to me to be promoting things. I don't like it. It makes me feel weird, you know, like I've done this research and I put it out there, and then I think about it, well, people will find it if they want it, but that's not the strategy that probably best gets that information out. And after all, that is the way to do it. Marketing is the way that you get attention to stuff that you want. And that is our goal, is to get information into people's head. So just this simple video, we actually just marketed it, like talking about diet selection. And the way that we did that stimulated a lot of interest in it. So we wanted to take that a little further. And there was another study that we implemented out. One of the things that I do, if you're not familiar with my program, I work a lot with forest stand improvement and habitat management, and how I'm trying to get people essentially to implement these practices on their property to better manage wildlife habitat. One of the things I'm commonly trying to do is get them to cut down trees. So how do you get people to cut down trees? That was what I was thinking about. And we came up with a couple of ideas. First, I didn't want to carry out this research, having a research appointment. I didn't want to carry it out without getting something that I could impact science with. So we did a study on this, and actually we haven't published it yet, and we have some more data, and we're working on getting it published now. But one of the things that was pretty striking about this data set is that if we cut down trees, so the control right here is the dark gray bar, if we cut down these red maples, or before we cut them down, they're relatively poor in this nutrient, and the same is true for a bunch of other ones. I just didn't want to show you but one for clarity. If we cut that tree down, automatically we increase nearly threefold, 2.5-fold or so, the nutrient, any of them that are mobile, but in this case phosphorus. We're literally making that resprouting vegetation super densely packed with nutrients, and deer respond accordingly to that. So particularly if you cut the tree down right before lactation and antler growth, you have densely packed nutritious forage right when the animals need it. So we thought about that long and hard. How do we market that? Bronson and I sat down, I remember a couple of times, and we talked on the phone about this. How do we market this so that people will latch on to it and run with it, right? That was the idea. So what we decided was that we would call it mineral stumps. And I'll go on and tell you, that made me feel a little bit uneasy calling it that. But I also knew how pervasive some practices are like pouring out minerals on the ground to enhance the mineral nutrition of deer. We knew that sort of stuff was already catching on in the population that we were targeting, which again was landowners that are interested in deer hunting. And we market it trying to get it to those people. And you can even read here what we're talking about: provide minerals to deer the way that Mother Nature intended. We're trying to play on something that we already know is going viral, so to speak, in this community on social media. So we marketed it that way, and it was pretty impressive. I'm showing you just a snippet of the data right here, but if you go and look at this video, you can go look at it on MSU Deer Lab's Facebook page. If you go look at that, it has now reached hundreds of thousands of people. And to me, that sort of blew me away, because we're talking about a really simple forest management technique, and we have gotten hundreds of thousands of people to look at that. And not only that, I have now moved institutions and started a new lab, and people are still finding me and emailing me directly, asking me questions. Which trees work best for this? Does it work if you apply fire instead of using a chainsaw? You know, all these different kinds of questions. People email me pictures showing me where they've cut down trees. I don't know how many tens of thousands of trees got cut down, but I know that a lot of people took that information and used it on their property, which, you know, was the target goal, right? I wanted them to increase sunlight to the forest floor and think about some more holistic habitat management practices rather than trying to pour minerals out of a sack. I would much rather them go cut trees down, right? And that's the way I was thinking. And I felt like that was a pretty successful way to do it, where we reached people on a scale that just wasn't possible in the former, more traditional model. We did this on that same property, and you know, we, instead of reaching a couple of thousand people, we've instead reached hundreds of thousands of people in many states. One more example, it's not all about videos and about YouTube, but we have some, we initially started our focus there. So I think we have some pretty good examples to show you from that. But one of the things that I also work quite a bit with is prescribed fire. And in the Eastern United States, that is a practice that is extremely important for habitat management for a wide range of wildlife species, and it is underutilized over much of the range. So I'm trying to get people to use fire more. And again, we are obviously targeting landowners. That's about 95% of our base are private landowners here, and almost all of them that are interested in wildlife, which is most of them, are interested in white-tailed deer. So that's a pretty good species to market your material toward. And I promise I'm going to talk about some stuff that is more relevant to damage management in a few minutes, but our programs are really geared toward, you know, this landowners and enhancing habitat in particular. So bear with me on that. But I realized one of the barriers that I run into constantly with people using fire is this idea that you have to burn at really large scales to make an impact. And when I say really large, I'm talking about even 50 acres seems pretty daunting to someone who's not engaged actively already in using prescribed fire. So I wanted to see, is there a creative way that we can market to those people with some of our research? And I did this study, and we have it published now. I can share that publication if you're interested in it, where we were looking at scale dependence in fire and how herbivores respond to it. And we went down to a facetiously small scale. So what you're looking at right here, we literally burned a 30-yard radius, and we put up a trail camera right here that you can see. And then we monitored deer use of that area. And we also had other scales, and you can see some of the data. When you burned, you have this huge spike in deer use of that space. So we did that in September, and it's replicated in a couple of different areas in pines and hardwoods. And then we we basically looked at it from the point of view, if you burned a 30-yard radius, which happens to be about the shot distance that most people are comfortable taking for a bow, if you're bow hunting deer. So we marketed it as bow range burning. And the idea was that even at that small scale, we could still increase the bow shot opportunities. If you burn in September during the October bow season, we would increase the number of opportunities for shots by about 13 or 14 times. And then, as you might imagine, when we released this as bow range burning, it got picked up all over the place on social media and pushed really hard. And again, we reached hundreds of thousands of people with this. And you may be thinking, well, that's kind of a ridiculously small scale. You're not going to really impact habitat there. However, this is what happened. A lot of people started burning, and I know that because I get emailed still about it all the time, that they watched bow range burning and that gave them the confidence that they could go out. I mean, who can't burn a quarter of an acre, right? That's what they were thinking. They got their training, did all the things that they need to do to implement this practice, and then went out and started burning around these small acreages around their stands. And then that got them comfortable with using fire, and then they started scaling up. And now I'm getting those stories a couple of years down the road where people were able to get past that scale barrier, and now they're implementing fire on their property at a level that can impact positively the habitat for deer and a whole range of other species. That there's no telling. I don't even know how many emails I've gotten about that, where people are telling me that story. That was a really a way to market that to people, to help them get past a barrier of implementing that information for the better of the resource. So it's really what I'm trying to emphasize here with you. So if we take this a little bit further, I know I've shown you several videos and some Facebook metrics. There's also some interesting data, and I'm happy to talk to people. You can really track who you're reaching and how, when you tweak things, you can reach different people. Notice with this audience right here, we're getting mostly white males between 25 and 45. We have tweaked some things, and we have shifted that to younger audiences, older audiences, more female. We haven't gotten it dominated by female, but we have gotten some pretty impressive shifts, I guess is what I'm telling you, in the demographics that we're able to reach just by tweaking the message. And I think I can't stress that enough, that how you deliver the message to a scientific community and different segments of the population is very different for the very same data. And that is the really fun part, and part where you have to be clever, from my perspective, to reach the audience that you want to, and reach them at a scale that you can really impact the resource at a large scale. That's the fun of it to me, is trying to figure out how do you market to different segments of the population. Because honestly, in my extension program, I want to directly impact people that can use the practice, like these private landowners that are interested in hunting. But I also am really interested in a 6th grader who's an inner city kid, at least if they can't directly use the information, to appreciate the importance of this resource and these practices that are needed to enhance their habitat, and just an appreciation for nature in general. So I'm really trying to do that sort of thing. So I know I'm getting kind of long-winded, so I'm going to try to speed up through some of this information. But one of the tools that I think we've been pretty successful with is podcasting. And this is a graph from a recent paper that Bronson led, that I'm an author on as well. We developed a podcast network based on funds from the Renewable Resources Extension Act. And as part of that, we published this paper to basically set the stage for anyone interested in podcasting. So if you're interested in starting this, that's a good place to start. You could take a look at that paper. But In that paper, one of the things we did was tracked the relative interest in podcasting. And you can see right here that that has been increasing, and it's only going to continue most likely. Podcasting is really blowing up now. And we have implemented a couple of strategies with that we think has been pretty successful. So Bronson started this a few years ago with Deere University, and I just wanted to show you really quickly, first of all, the reach that he has had. So his extension program is based in Mississippi, but the downloads of these podcasts are everywhere. And I'm just showing you the whole number percentages, but every episode that he produces on that is downloaded in every state, every single one. And I think he averages like 16 or 18 countries that are downloading every podcast episode. So that if you think about the reach of that, that's pretty impressive that he's able to do that even when he's focusing on one species here. So think about how that might be integrated into your own program. We together, Bronson and I and a couple of other colleagues at Purdue and Iowa State started a network of podcasts with that RREA funding, and that is called Natural Resources University. And we just started this a couple of months ago. We're already picking up steams on downloads. It's not comparable to Deere University, but we're trying to grow. In fact, if you're interested in a topic related to this and you're in extension and you're interested in podcasting, we are trying to grow the network. So you can reach out about that if you're interested, or if you just want more information. But I wanted to show you this graphic because even though we're only a few months in, every country that you see with color means that we're getting downloaded in that country, which to me is just showing you the power of using technology to extend knowledge. It's pretty impressive. I mean, you can reach people at a scale that's just not doable with other forms of extension. So all of these different things that we're talking about are based on this kind of this model. And I tried to draw a schematic of it, and it's not a very good one, but it'll kind of give you the idea. We're trying to use peer-reviewed information and get it into the media, get it on social media, which is pretty easy. We write extension documents. For me, that's called EDIS. We're using podcasting. We're going in the classroom. All of these things are feeding back into the kinds of information we're trying to publish. But it's really a synergistic model where you are trying to push content through every different kind of outlet you can so that you can create this synergy between your different platforms to deliver that information. And if we start adding together programs, like I work closely still with Bronson and we share each other's information all the time, we're trying to reach the same people, and we can really create this positive feedback that continues to elevate everyone's program. So one of the tricky parts of this is how do you get stuff into the news media, and do you want to? That's something, a can of worms you may not want to open, but if you do, how do you do that? So here's another way that we did it. It's quite different from some of these other approaches, but some of you may be aware of this paper that I'm showing you right here, but it's been identified that noise pollution has been a pretty big issue from an ecological standpoint, even in our natural areas. And one of my colleagues that I was working with, Brandon Barton, had this really awesome idea. He wanted to see, are any of these indirect effects? So think about what I just said. We're talking about noise pollution and indirect effects in ecology. Man, how dry is that, right? Nobody wants to think about that stuff. How's that going to get into the media? But he had this idea that we could call it the AC/DC hypothesis. And we literally set up this experiment to test indirect effects in this system. And we played AC/DC to them, right? That was one of our treatments. And we published it as testing the AC/DC hypothesis. And that was one thing that really opened my eyes, because I felt a little bit weird about that, but also was like, man, I love AC/DC. Rock and roll ain't noise pollution. That is a testable hypothesis. We're going to do that, right? I couldn't not do that. even though I felt a little bit weird about it. So what happened when we did that is, this is the Altmetric Score. I don't know, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that if you're not familiar with that, but essentially that's talking about the attention of the paper. We published this in Ecology and Evolution, and it's one of the top downloaded papers in the journal, and one of the top altmetric scores in the journal of all time, which was the point, right? Get people to read about stuff. We had this covered in all kinds of outlets that are engaging people that are never engaged in science, right? The Rolling Stone, for instance, covered this. Those people aren't thinking about nature very often, is my guess. And we found a creative way to ask a question where we were able to engage them with an important global change. And it really was a pretty wild thing. So another facet of this, I know I'm bouncing around, but I promise this did make sense in my head. It's really interesting to think about how people accept information. And when you change the way that you're delivering it, you can really change whether or not people will accept knowledge. And I think that's a pretty important thing for you to be considering. And for instance, if we're talking about global change, people aren't not all people are receptive to the idea of listening to something about global change. A lot of people are tired of hearing it or don't believe it or whatever. But when we changed it into that fun platform, then people were very accepting of that. And this was a really cool study that I think is worth a read if you've never looked at that. But particularly on controversial issues, people tend, as they get more information, to just get more polarized on it. And that's something important for you to consider. They particularly on those polarizing issues, they just get farther and farther apart. And that's important for you because, you know, we have this confirmation bias, I guess, that we tend to seek out information that confirms our own biases. And social media in particular is really good about promoting that. I guess the algorithm, the way that it's structured, it really is facilitated by that. So think about that when you're actually trying to create content and you're trying to reach as many people as possible. Think about how you are marketing that and how that plays into these algorithms in this. You know, things that are shocking or funny or controversial tend to go farther. All right. I wanted to show you some other stuff that is pretty interesting. Another thing, we found that long form content, we did a thing just recently called the Final Forage, and it was long form content. We had episodes, we put a ton of effort into this. You're looking at right here, and we were trying to play on the basketball tournament, and we did this playoff between forages. We thought, man, this is such an awesome idea, right? We launched it just recently in the basketball tournament. That was the intro for it. You can see we put a lot of time and effort into that. Charlotte Nowak, she's an author on this. She's the communication specialist housed in my lab. I don't know, I think she tracked how many hours, but she spent weeks of her time putting all this together. And we ended up with what we were calling long form content. And that content was designed to engage people on diet selection with deer. And MSU Deer Lab and UF Deer Lab collaborated. And we were kind of expecting it to just blow up. And we think because it was long form content, it did not do as well, nearly as well as we thought. And what I mean by long form content is people had to sit there and be engaged in that material for more than just a few minutes. You know, we're talking about 30, 45 minutes. It's really hard to keep somebody involved in that. And we had 5 episodes like that, and it just didn't perform nearly as well. We ended up reaching 15 or 20,000 people, but we were expecting them, you know, each episode to reach that many rather than it collectively. And it was disappointing. So just to give you some comparison is, with this is a meme right here. So it's basically just a picture with some words on it, right? with that simple post, it took us like 30 seconds to make. We reached more than 30,000 people with that, right? So we've spent all those weeks of time and effort and putting all that into the production of that other thing. And then we had this thing that was 30 seconds to make, and we reached twice as many people with it, which is, you know, kind of depressing on one front, but on the other one, that is a form of content that can be very effective. And, you know, I'm trying to talk to people about burning for turkeys. Turkeys are declining. One of the reasons we've identified are related to habitat. The things that promote that habitat that's missing is fire. Here, I'm trying to reach people with that message in a way that maybe they will implement it. Another one that we're working on right now, we haven't released it, but really simple, right? A simple meme, powerful message. I'm trying to get people to stop relying on supplemental feeding, instead habitat management. And again, we focus a lot on fire. So that's what you're seeing here. So I wanted to think about what are some things that you might be able to, if you're interested in damage management. So I'm showing you basically, what about if you're interested in a conibear trout? So I went on YouTube to see what's on there. Notice the first video on top, it's actually from a private entity. I went and explored it a little bit, and they're doing a really great job, but they are selling a service and a product. And that video has been watched 140,000 times. That's pretty crazy, right? And it's a pretty simple video. It probably took them only a few minutes to put together. I will give a shout out. The next one on there is from an extension service. So, you know, people are using this, and that's great. But think about how you can use these things in your program. Sorry, my something's jittery on my screen. So I thought of another strategy just to show you how you can get creative with these things. I thought about, well, where do people find information on feral pigs? Type in feral pig, they go to Wikipedia, right? This page right here gets visited 300 times a day. If you want to target people that are interested in feral pigs, why wouldn't you make sure that your information is available to people where they're going to look for it on Wikipedia? You might notice there are a whole bunch of extension documents and a whole bunch of people that work on pigs a lot. I highlighted the ones from the authors on this presentation, but I also wanted to point you back to this Altmetric. So this is a paper that we published on it. That score that I highlighted right there is Altmetric. Here's the little emblem that you're looking at right here. You can see where people are getting it, where it's getting covered. Notice there's Wikipedia pages. Now I know that paper is being implemented. That's an open source place for people to get information. You can go in yourself and edit it in, and you know, going and putting your information, you're getting it directly to people who are looking for it. And that's a really good way to do that. And I think it's, I wanted to leave you with that idea, because those are the kinds of creative ways that you can use technology to target the people that you're trying to reach. And in this case, it's a really active way. It feels a little bit strange or dirty or however you want to think about that, because it seems like self-promotion, but think about this as promoting your information to address a resource concern. And why would you not go through that effort to make sure these things are visible? Again, in that journal, this is one of the top most read papers in the journal. Right? We're using strategies that seem to be effective, and there are many, many, many more strategies that we're trying out. So I'm happy to talk to you about that if you're interested. And there are also many, many strategies that I have no idea even exist. It's as it's as wide open as you are creative to try to leverage different platforms. So with that, I know that I was pretty long-winded, but hopefully that was informative to you all, and I hope you have an appreciation for the role technology can play in information transfer. And again, we're on social media. Feel free to follow us or reach out to us through that, or you find my email or Bronson's email pretty easily. But be happy to take questions later on.